You are listening to the Gospel-Centered Education Podcast, brought to you by Community Christian School in Tallahassee, Florida.
Hello, and welcome to the Gospel-Centered Education Podcast. I'm Tom Margerson, your host, and my host is Kelly Allen. Hey, Kelly.
Hey, Tom. On the Gospel-Centered Education Podcast, we explore how we as Jesus followers can connect the dots between education, contemporary culture, and biblical theology, and live like Jesus in a broken and challenging world. And today, we're talking about teen dating and safety with Miss Nicole Whitaker. We're so happy to have you on today. You are such a great guest today because of your involvement as an attorney, but also as the executive director of Christians Against Trafficking. But before we get to that, just want to tell everybody that you are a wife and mother of two daughters here at CCS, and you attend Four Oaks Killarn, and you just have a lot to say about this. You have been an advocate for against human trafficking for about 15 years. So we said you're the executive director of Christians Against Trafficking. What is that?
So it is an organization of Christians from all different backgrounds here in Tallahassee. We just kind of came together realizing that the fight against human trafficking is an issue that the Lord cares about, and it breaks his heart. And as Christians, we need to do something about it. And so we started around 2021 and started with the summit and had an amazing response of over 300 people in attendance, 30 different churches represented.
Wow.
And realized that, the body of Christ is answering this call and they want to do something about it. So I didn't intend to create a nonprofit. Like you said, I'm an attorney. I'm a former prosecutor. I didn't intend to be an executive director of a nonprofit, but we saw the Lord's heart for this issue and the church's response and realized that we needed to create something to help the church answer this call. So that's what we do, and we focus on all aspects of human trafficking and really believe that everybody can do something, that we can use our gifts and our talents and our callings from the Lord to fight this issue together.
Yeah, very good.
Wow,
Well, what great
awesome
work that is. That's so important today for sure. So obviously there was a kind of an organic way this kind of came about, it sounds like. But for you kind of personally in your heart and everything, what kind of led you towards this profession in general?
So I actually thought I was going to be a professional singer.
Oh, nice. I think I actually remember that at some point. Yeah.
I know that about you.
So I lived in Nashville. I went to Belmont University.
That's right, yeah.
And I went to a Natalie Grant concert in 2008. I had no idea what it was going to be about. And she talked about how the Lord broke her heart over human trafficking. And I just remember a moment sitting there listening to her sing and talk about this that I just broke and realized that I could no longer live my life, realizing that what I know now as though it doesn't exist. And so it changed the whole course of my life, really. I decided to go to law school. I worked at a nonprofit to fight human trafficking. I took a year in between while I got ready for law school and just went there with this entire focus of that's what my life is going to be about.
It's funny because just as a follow-up to that, I've often, when I've ever gotten into that area and kind of I've done a little research, not nearly as much as you, but it just can seem like such an overwhelming, because there's so much. I mean, it's just a lot. So has that been difficult, just the enormity of the task?
Yeah, there are times. So it's a joke. I have a group of amazing people throughout this state who fight trafficking in the state, and we work together on legislation and policy. And one of my favorite guys in the group says, "Well, I quit this job about once every day." And so, we absolutely have those moments. There are moments where I'm like, "Why am I doing this? You know, why?" It can be really emotionally challenging. There's a lot of spiritual warfare and aspects related to it, but when you're doing the work that God called you to do, that's what really fuels you, is your calling and God's call in your life. And
it's such a great intersection. That's a great point, Nicole. It's such a great intersection with what we try to do here at CCS, with gospel-centered education, because that a lot of folks today don't really even understand the concept of calling. It's just not a thing for them. They're like, what? And so what we try to do, especially with our older kids and even with our younger kids to some extent, is to say, God really does he knows you, he loves you, he accepts you in Christ and all that. And he does have a pathway. And part of our role as parents, I think, and then other people around parents, is to help shepherd that a little bit and say, what is God saying? And create some spaces like we do Vision Quest in the secondary school where it's just time to just listen. To get into Word and go, okay, God, what is it you want me to do? And then what does this look like? Because that's a frustrating thing. So anyway, a little sidebar. But I think it's an important connection, because that calling that was placed on your life in a difficult milieu mirrors a lot of Christians. A lot of Christians are called to difficult milieus, and that's okay. That's part of what the Lord is actually saying.
And when you're moving in your calling, you get joy and satisfaction out of that. What would you say would be the most joy and satisfaction that you get out of what you do?
Well, really, just knowing that I really truly believe I was created for this. And even when I felt called to it, I could look back in my life and see good experiences and bad experiences that I feel like help prepare me for this, and like God even redeeming some bad things that I have faced in my life to help me be more empathetic and more understanding, and just how He's shaped my whole life in preparation for this calling. So there's great joy in that, in walking in your calling. I also just have a huge love for fighting injustice and walking alongside survivors, those who are coming out of the life, and that can be really difficult. But also I found really great joy in working with survivors in this field, those who are now turning it around and using their pain and the trauma they've faced to help others. There's just something really powerful about so many of this. I mean, there's some of the most amazing people that I know, and seeing the redemption God's done in their life and using it for good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is such a cool thing. I just love that. And partially because I just know you, and I know that is your heart. And secondly, because, God is very interested in justice. It's a big deal to him. And whether it's the global justice in the sense of Christ dying on the cross for our sins and making things right with God in that sense, or in the eternal sense that eventually all things are going to be made right, or in the local, regional sense today, that you're working to try to make things right. Well, one of the things we do here at CCS is we're kind of fighting, ignorance in a way, not knowing. And so we're trying to help kids, young people, understand and know God, and then know what the world is like, but also things about the world, specifically for careers and those kind of things. So let's go ahead and pivot, if we can, kind of to from the larger picture, maybe down to something a little bit more directly connected to the school and our work in education. That is February, I believe, is Teen Dating Violence Month. And so talk to me a little bit about that, and just from your perspective, what that's all about.
I would say you're probably an expert in knowing how to set boundaries with people.
Yeah, well, so that's something. So, human trafficking is mainly my focus, but I think that the root of all that, which is also the root with teen dating violence, is just healthy relationships and what that looks like and how you model that. So I used to work as an assistant state attorney here, and so I handled a lot of domestic violence cases, and there's a lot of similarity between all of those things. So one of the biggest things that I say for parents, because I get asked that a lot, like, how can I protect my kids? You see the worst stuff in the world all the time. How do I protect my kids from it? And I think the boundaries, like you said, is one of the best ways to do so, and starting at a really young age. So my goal with my kids is, I always say, I make them a hard target, because predators tend to go after the more vulnerable, and they prey on vulnerabilities. So if I try to protect my kids by making them as hard of a target in all of those areas, then that's a way to protect them from predators, unhealthy relationships. And so it starts at a young age. My kids are really young. They're 6 and 9. So clearly there's a lot of what I do that they don't know about yet. Right? And there's a lot of the things that we don't talk about. And so you have to do it in an age appropriate way. But there are ways to put boundaries in to protect them from predators without having to talk about that stuff. So for my little ones, we have certain rules. For instance, we play with our clothes on. We talk about how private parts are made to be private, and we don't show them. And we talk about what a safe adult looks like. And so safe adults don't ask kids to keep secrets. And safe adults don't seek out kids for help. So a safe adult will not have lost their puppy and ask a child to help them find their puppy, right? So we put those boundaries in place without having to talk about exactly what I'm protecting them from, but just knowing these are good boundaries. And so it starts at a young age like that with those simple boundaries. But then I think even as kids get older, and even at a young age now with the little kids too, just talking about body boundaries, it seems like a little silly sometimes. But just asking them, like, what type of touch is okay with you and what's not? You know, do you like to be hugged or would you prefer a high five? Just really simple stuff like that, like getting them used to realizing like what feels comfortable in their body and being able to verbally express it without shame or feeling weird about it. Because if you start that at a young age, then as you get older, if there are people in your life who are not respecting your boundaries, then you start becoming more aware of it and knowing what to do when your body boundaries are not respected. Because someone who wants to hurt you, a predator, they don't come in on the first day and hit you. That's not how it works. This is through domestic.
Process,
exactly. You'd see that with domestic violence and with human trafficking, any type of predator, really. It's a grooming process where they build relational trust. And so, but eventually they will start pushing some of those boundaries, but it'll be slow and it'll be not like hitting you right away, right? But if your kids have very clear body boundaries of what's okay and what's not okay, then as those lines start getting crossed, they can start saying, maybe this person isn't safe earlier on in the situation.
So as they get older, what's a parent to look for with healthy and unhealthy relationships and dating and stuff like that?
That's a good question. So one of the things that we do at Christians Against Trafficking is we work with a lot of community partners. We're all about unity and working together. So one of our amazing partners is a women's pregnancy center. And so we were talking about this before I came on the podcast today. And they actually have this little resource. And it's a checklist. So once your kids are in kind of relationship type phase, clearly mine are not there yet, thank goodness. But once they are, this is like a checklist of different things to look for in a relationship. It says, is it toxic? And there's like 30 different things.
Wow.
It's stuff like, is there a lack of communication? Do you have mismatched relationship goals? Are they constantly critical or cruel? So there's some that are clearly not a huge red flag, like a lack of communication. We all have that at some point. But then there's different types of levels. And so you go through it and look at the different things. There's some that have little asterisks by are they always yelling and screaming at you? Do they have abusive behavior, violent displays? Clearly, those are big red flags that immediately go to this is a toxic relationship. But other ones just like needs constant reassurance, lack of emotional intimacy. So you look at this and kind of you could talk through it with your kids and help them evaluate their relationships. And then it goes through, how many red flags did you have? Did you have any of those ones with the asterisks? And then realizing, like, is it just time to maybe, like, talk about these things with your partner? Or is it maybe time to take a break? Or are there so many factors now that really this is toxic at this point and you should separate?
So you're really looking for patterns, it sounds like, especially in those ones that are seem a little more innocuous at first because they, like you said, a lot of people struggle with them. But if you see these in ongoing patterns, and especially if you see some of the more intense challenges, then it's time to step back and take a look at it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's really good.
So I want to go back to what we said is establishing healthy boundaries. That can start when they're young. And then some of those things that you mentioned are kind of, they're red flags. How do they establish a healthy boundary if they're like, if you see your child in a toxic relationship, how do you help them establish boundaries in that or get away from that
So
as they get older, as in the teenage years?
Right.
Yeah.
That's really, it can be challenging for sure once they're already in that situation. So I always would recommend always having open communication with your kids, pointing things out, but in a loving, like non-judgmental way and letting them know that you're on their side. Because often when you're in a healthy relationship, especially if there's other person has more predatory type behaviors, they like to separate you from your family and make you feel like everybody's against you but them. And so you really want to let your kid know you're on their side, you love them, you care for them, and not just attack the other person, but kind of show them some instances. And I also always recommend getting a third party involved because it's not somebody in their life, it's a totally objective third party who's not necessarily on their side or the other person's side. They can just help you see things. So even a women's pregnancy center, I know they are always thought of as just being like about pregnancy, but they have counselors there, and if you can bring your kids and they'll talk about some of this stuff with them.
Wow, that's really cool to know.
Yeah, so they have counselors there and would be willing to speak with them as well, or just find another counselor who specializes in these types of things to be able to talk it out with them.
Just reminded me that back in the day, as parents, we would talk about the Romeo and Juliet syndrome. As you're trying to avoid that with your kids, so the object is, like you said, is not necessarily to at first just separate, push them away, because sometimes that just fuels the fire more.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of accomplishes the opposite of your actual goal.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, what I think we're trying to do with our kids is, and whether we're doing it in school or churches or in the home, and particularly in the home, is to teach our kids to walk in wisdom.
Absolutely.
And then to also be comfortable, to be comfortable in the idea that God really is sovereign and God really is going to take care of us. But as we talked with Ray Hernandez last week about school safety and security, that doesn't mean we walk around with our head in the sand and do dumb things, because that usually gets us in trouble in some way. And so it's that balance. One of the things I was going to ask you, Nicole, is what do you think is a hindrance to more parents kind of engaging with this topic? Why do you think it's hard for people to deal with or get into?
Well, a lot of this stuff, what I live in is the hard topics.
Right.
And I think sometimes we shy away from talking about those things because they're uncomfortable. But if we don't talk to our kids about the hard and uncomfortable things, then the world is going to teach them.
Oh, it's so powerful.
And so it's really important as parents to have those hard conversations, to talk things out, and to let them know that we can talk about hard things and that you're a safe place and that you're their advocate and you're on their side. The more that you address those hard things with them and show them that you're just giving them tools and that we can talk about this stuff, the more they will talk to you about things.
It's I find the same thing, and even some of the things we have to talk about here at school. I think there are also certain folks that are just really averse to just negative things. It's just really hard for them to go there, and that makes it difficult, right? Because because there are hard things in the world.
For sure.
And one of the things that we always try to tie everything back to is, the gospel is true, and God. We understand. I was saying to somebody the other day that they were saying the world is so broken and it's such a mess, and that it's easy to look at that and just be despairing and just go right down the rabbit hole, and it's just horrible. And what I try to remind people, I try to remind myself too, because I do it too, is the world is really broken. Depending on your job and your career, you see it firsthand, law enforcement and all this kind of stuff. And education, you see a lot of difficult things, but Jesus is still there.
For sure.
He's still present. So he's, and eventually everything will be made right at the end of the day. And so when people say, why would I not walk in fear? If all of this stuff is true, then why would I not walk in fear? And maybe you can speak to that a little bit. Why not walk in fear? Because it seems like the natural thing to do.
Yeah. Well, I think what I always say too is when you see the darkness increasing, so is the light. And that's kind of what I feel about CCS. I feel like this is the place where our kids are being raised up to be those little torch bearers and the light in the darkness. And so, for me, I'm motivated by the evil things that I see in the world, realizing that, okay, my kids can help be the difference. And, and Jesus is the difference. And I think that our kids are having an outpouring of the Holy Spirit in a way that even our generation doesn't understand. Because as the darkness is increasing and as the world gets darker, Jesus is pouring his Spirit out more. And so it's important.
That's really
That's
good.
awesome.
And so it's important to have those conversations because you want your kids to be the light in the dark place and to realize that no matter how dark it is, they can always shine the light of Jesus. He always brings hope to every situation. And like I said, with those survivors that I've talked to you about, they are such beacons of hope to see that they've been through some of the most horrific things you can possibly imagine. But Jesus found them in that place. And he's restored them, redeemed their lives, and now they are going out and helping others in those hard situations. So there's always redemption. And
what a beautiful message. God said, that's just awesome.
That is
because
awesome.
I think one of the challenges that people have today, and again, we see it regularly here, and you see it, is just a lack of hope. nothing's going to ever get better. Things are just going to get worse. We can't trust, the government to get any better. We can't trust whatever institution or whatever. But it's not really about trusting the government. It really isn't about trusting institutions. It's really about trusting God and to understand that He is active. He's not passive in the world. And I think that does bring, it should bring hope, because ultimately God is better. He's more powerful. Greater is He that is in me than he that is in the world. And that's a really powerful truth, which reminds me of one other thing I wanted to touch on real quick, and that is, in all of these areas of safety and security, it's important to have these really candid discussions about that, and then also to touch back to Scripture and to say, what does the Word say about this? And how can we rely on those promises and on those truths and those doctrinal truths and everything? Because that's what's really going to give us, in the end, that inner peace, I think, that will really help us out. I want to touch on one more thing before we close. And we talked a little bit about this beforehand. We don't have time to go way deep into this, but I did want to touch a little bit just on the issue of the digital world and kind of the safety issues in the digital world. Again, there's so much there. We're going to do a separate podcast on that later, but I know you have a lot of thoughts on that. So I want to give you a little bit of a space, maybe in a general way. There's a lot of platforms out there, a lot of things going on, a lot of conversations about regulation or not regulation and all that kind of stuff. If you have some thoughts on that, we'd love to hear you talk about that a little bit.
Sure, well, plenty.
I thought that might be true.
But I'll start with, since we're talking about parents and how to protect your kids, really, I cannot stress enough monitoring any of their digital devices. I mean, putting lots of safety protocols in place. And there's different things, actually funny, on social media that I follow that talk about this. There's a one on Instagram called Protect Young Eyes. And there's lots of advice on there about the dangers and what we can do as parents and the safeguards we can put in place.
Excellent.
And also talking to your kids from the perspective of, I'm not putting these in place because I don't trust you. I'm doing this in partnership with you to make sure that you're safe and putting good boundaries around you. Like, we're in this together. I think I struggle a lot that you see sometimes in the media and movies and stuff. We're like, oh, don't violate your kids' privacy. And I'm like, no. Yeah, they live in your home. You bought them the device. That is not a privacy issue. Like, the digital world is not safe for our children. It is not. And they have to be part of it. That's the world we live in. But they need to be part of it with you. So, safety protocols, limiting things online, absolutely limiting social media, checking their phones regularly, having different, I think there's even devices where all of their text messages can be sent to your phone and monitor them. So just really heavily monitoring all of that stuff, I think is really, really important. But then also in the tech industry, I think we were talking about this, it's just I think that we need to hold them more accountable for how they're involved in this. As a lawyer, I think the best way to hold businesses accountable is through civil litigation. And so that hasn't been a big topic recently, is how there's immunity for these platforms from what third parties post. And so I'm a huge advocate of changing that, because if we're not able to hold them accountable in the court of law, they're not going to change their behavior. It's too profitable to do it otherwise. But our kids are the ones who are facing the consequences of that. And it's just a dangerous world for our kids, from bullying to predators having access to our kids. I think some of the discussions where even kids can buy illegal drugs through some of these social platforms. And so we just need to know that those things were not created for children or with children in mind or their safety. So it's our job as parents to really monitor that and protect them.
And in some cases, they were created with kids in mind.
Well, negatively.
In a more nefarious way. I have a good friend who would say that that digital technology and those platforms, it's not neutral. I think a lot of people have this general sense that that the digital world is neutral. It's not really neutral. I mean, there's activity towards you, whether it's as simple as getting clicks for various things or marketing or that kind of thing, or perhaps more nefarious ways of drawing people in. And again, not that we're trying to stir up fear here, but I think you have to start with that basic realization as a parent. It's not this device is not neutral. It's actually active. Now, that can be good or it can be not good, and that gets to what you were saying, Nicole. And so I kind of asked that same question I asked before, is why is it so, because I hear this all the time, why is it so hard for parents to do the things that you're talking about, because it is. Even if they know that's what they're supposed to do. What do you reckon is so hard about that for them?
Well, probably the pressure from their kids. I mean, I know my 9-year-old has been asking me for a cell phone since she was 5.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I'm just finally like, honey, with what mommy does, I see all the bad things in the world, and I don't want to hear how many of your friends have cell phones. First of all, I know some of them that you're saying are not true, and I can call her mom right now.
And verify.
Should I call her? I know her.
Yeah.
But also, that doesn't matter to me.
Yeah.
You know, you're my kid. I know the absolute worst things in the world, and I'm just going to protect you from that. That's my job. And it's hard. She's been asking for years now, and I just keep telling her no. But you just have to do that. And she'll say, so-and-so has this. I'm like, not their mom. But it's hard. It's hard when your kids pressure you or say that they're being left behind.
Yeah.
And I have that balance a little bit with my younger daughter because, you know, they do say for lots of reasons you should limit technology with kids. But I also feel like there's a balance that we live in a technological world, and if they don't know how to use these things, they're going to be behind. I always joke that I'm a millennial, but I'm an old millennial. And so people always think like, oh, you're a millennial, you know how to do this. I'm like, no, I do not.
I have that same problem.
Yeah, but so my 6-year-old is just like really gifted with technology.
Oh, wow.
But it also, if she's on it too much, it makes her very cranky. Very bad attitude. So we're trying to balance and put limits on it. There's great things now. There's like a screen time limit on iPads that you can set it to shut off at a certain time. So I don't have to be the bad guy and say, let's take it away. It just shuts off. And so, yes, there's things that make it easier. But I'm always trying to find a balance with her to let her explore that because she's great. And I'm like, you might have a wonderful career in IT.
For right
which
now.
is great. But right now, you also are like really grouchy if you're on it too long, and it's not good for you. So we have to have a balance. But it's hard. There's a lot of pushback, and also they kind of model us. I know I have a problem where I definitely feel like I'm on my cell phone too much, and if we're not modeling good behavior, they're like, "Well, you have your cell phone. You're always on your cell phone."
No,
we're like working and stuff from our cell phones, so they don't realize,
or not working,
or
just keep getting drawn back to it because it is made to be addictive.
Exactly,
and that's why it's not safe for our kids too.
That's such a huge point, right? Because I mean, that's the one thing that we as parents don't want to hear. That somehow we're doing something that's actually worsening the problem. That's really hard to accept. I was wondering if you as a parent, Kelly, if this is kind of resonating with you and just folks that you know.
I think we have, you know, we do the same things with our kids. You know, you really have to monitor it and say no, and it's hard to say no.
It takes courage.
It does take courage to say no.
Yeah.
Well, and everything pushes you towards the cell phone thing. So, for instance, my daughter is on a travel cheerleading team, and so I'm always with her. But there's times where she might get separated from me. I don't know. We go big crowds and stuff, and so I want to have a way I can communicate with her if we get separated. Or as she's starting to want to go to friends' houses now without me, nobody has house phones anymore. Right. If something happens, I need to communicate. But I didn't want her to have a cell phone. So I went to the store to try to get her one of those little watches where you can communicate. And they have them, but they looked at me like I was crazy. They're like, well, you can get, if you start a cell phone plan, you can get a cell phone for free and just push this cell phone thing.
Wow.
And I was like, she's 8. She was 8 at the time. I was like, I don't want to give her a cell phone. I'm like, well, it's going to cost a lot more money if you do this watch. I like pulled it out of storage. It's all dusty. Like, nobody buys it anymore. And I'm like, I get why parents are just, it's way more economical to just buy them a cell phone. But her safety is more important to me than that. So I was like, give me the watch. And I also like, there's some cell phones that have more protective measures in place and they're more stripped down and you can't go to the internet. They're more like the watch. But also, she's 8. She's going to lose that thing in 5 minutes. She loses everything. It needs to be connected to her body. But it's shoved down your throat all the time. And they make it more advantageous to go that route. But you just have to sometimes stand firm and say, I'm going to spend the money. Like, I need to communicate, but her safety is the most important.
It's so much like what we say, you know, again, tying it back to what we try to teach here. And that is, you know, there are a lot of times in the world where you're going to have to stand firm in faith. And often you can do that together with other people. But sometimes you've got to stand firm alone.
It's true.
And that is the part that really takes courage. And I think it's so hard, especially if you're in a peer group as parents, where everybody's kind of going, I don't get the problem here.
Yeah.
What's the big deal?
Yeah.
You know, so it's like, well, you know, hopefully you can begin to add some people to your peer group that maybe have a little more balanced or another view on that, kind of balance out that thing.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, you know your children and you know their capabilities, and you can set the boundaries.
That's right.
That's why teaching those boundaries at an early age is so good. I've seen examples of my own kids, like Isabel's gone over to people's houses and they've been playing Roblox.
Right.
Roblox is absolutely banned in our house. Like, it is a no. And so she told them, like, well, I'm not going to play with you. Like, I can't make you stop, but I do insist that while I'm here, the chat feature must be turned off.
Yeah.
So you're not talking to people.
How old is she again?
She was like 7 or 8 at the
pretty
time.
impressive. That's impressive.
Yeah. She's has a very big leader personality, so she's never afraid to
I wonder
stand
where
up.
she got that.
And then she said, I'm not going to play with you, but like, please turn the chat feature off. That's unsafe. And then my little one, who is more my wild card, she's had instances too where she's young. So there have been boys who have maybe pulled a private part out or something to go to the bathroom on a playground or something. Yeah. And she immediately knew how to handle it. She just goes, that's a private part. Put it away. Because she knew it's a private part. Should not be seeing it.
Yeah.
It needs to be covered.
Yep.
Wow.
And then she knows I'm her safe adult. And so the minute that I then picked her up, she just very candidly told me what happened, told me what she did. And it was not a big deal. Just like,
Moving
there was
on.
a private part exposed. I told me to cover it up. I said, okay, these things work.
You must have been very gratified at that moment. It's like, wow, this really works.
Yeah, because she's the one I'm always like, will she apply it? I don't know. So I was proud of like that. It just shows that when you talk about this stuff at a young age and you have open communication, that they put it into practice and they know what to do. Like neither of those situations were necessarily dangerous in themselves, but they have that firm boundary. They know this is things that are not okay.
And,
we put away.
and so much of it just saying it's okay to set the boundary as a parent. It's okay.
Yes.
It's actually good as long as it's a reasonable boundary that makes sense and is rational and all that. So, well, gosh, I'd love to continue this conversation a really long time, and we'd love to have you back at some point. It'd be great.
Oh, definitely.
But maybe we can take just a second. If you just take a second here at the end and kind of give us a takeaway, if you had to summarize, you know, kind of what we talked about, you know, what would you want to say to parents out there?
For sure. So I would say the open communication is really important. Setting boundaries, like simple boundaries all through their life, and talking about body boundaries, what makes them comfortable and uncomfortable, letting them talk about that and feel comfortable expressing those things, modeling healthy relationships yourself, monitoring all types of technology, and then at the end of the day, realizing that our kids belong to Jesus and that He is their greatest protector. And so we put our best effort forward and it'll make them a hard target, but at the end of the day, submit them to the Lord and know that He's going to protect them, and pray. That's the most important thing. Pray over them all the time.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. What a blessing. What a great
I really
thing.
learned a lot today.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so that'll do it for today.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for joining us today. We're so glad that you could be a part of what we're talking about today.
Yes.
Please remember that I'm going to say what you're usually saying. That is, you can make sure you access the Gospel Centered Education podcast wherever you get your podcast. And remember, go ahead.
And next week,
what's going to happen next week?
Okay,
Do we know even what's going to happen?
Next
I'm not
week
even
we're
sure.
going to be kind of unpacking what we've learned from our past guests and from today.
Yeah.
And then we're going to be preparing for Dr. Jeter to come the following week.
Yeah, so tell me, what's a little bit about Dr. Jeter real quick?
Dr. Jeter, she's a marriage and family therapist. She's an FSU professor. She is going to be wonderful talking to us about healthy parenting.
Yeah, healthy parenting.
Without fear.
Parenting without fear. Yeah. Which is kind of a neat follow-up in a way to all of the stuff we've been talking about the last few weeks. So it's really good.
Yes, because we could be pretty fearful.
Right, absolutely. Well, along those lines, so we just always want to close by saying, remember this. Till we see you next time, that Jesus is Lord. Take care, you guys.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Gospel Centered Education Podcast, brought to you by Community Christian School in Tallahassee, Florida. You can find us online at myccs.org.